Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in what is arguably the most critical, yet often least understood, war-fighting function.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the logistical backbone of large-scale combat operations. We're talking about sustaining division operations. Now, this is a subject that might sound technical, but trust me, if the logistics fail, the combat force stops cold and culminates.
It culminates. That's it. It's the ultimate enabler for victory, but it's also the single point of failure.
It really is.
It's the oxygen supply of the fight. And for anyone trying to master military strategy, to really understand modern warfare, you have to understand the system. So our goal today is to go deep into how Army divisions plan for, organize, and execute sustainment in these incredibly complex and dangerous environments. And we're going to focus squarely on the doctrinal requirements and then the critical practical planning factors that, keep a massive formation moving, shooting, and surviving.
To guide this deep dive, we're synthesizing knowledge from two foundational sources. First, we're working with excerpts from the Army's capstone doctrine, Field Manual 3.0, dated March 2025, titled Operations.
Which is really the intellectual blueprint for multi-domain operations. It sets the whole stage.
It really does. And we are anchoring that doctrine with the, let's call it the quantitative side. We're drawing heavily from the student text, sustainment, application methods, planning factors, organizations, and tools.
Right. And that student text, that's where you get the hard data, the formulas, the specific numbers that planners use every single day to turn these, abstract concepts into actual operational plans.
Our mission today is clear. We need to unpack the intense and frankly demanding relationship between the operational requirements placed on a division, especially when fighting a peer adversary in a contested environment, and the intricate web of logistics, health service support, and financial management required.
All of it.
All of it. All of it's needed to ensure the division has the necessary endurance and can successfully execute operations across the deep, close, and rear areas of the battlefield. So let's jump in.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this doctrinal framework established by Field Manual 3.0. This manual formalizes the shift to the multi-domain operations concept, which, by its very nature, means that the challenge for sustainment has not just increased, it's fundamentally changed.
It's a whole different ballgame.
Right. Historically, logistics units operated in a relative sanctuary, but that's just not the world we live in now.
Yeah.
How does modern conflict, especially against a peer adversary, strain that entire logistics system?
It strains it because the modern fight directly targets the sustainment warfighting function from the very beginning, from minute one. And in doing so, it immediately threatens two core doctrinal concepts that sustainment dictates: endurance and operational reach.
Okay, let's break those down, because those aren't just academic terms. They are, as you said, the metrics of survival on the battlefield.
They really are. And we should move beyond just the rigid definitions. Let's talk about what these concepts feel like on the ground.
Yeah.
Think of endurance as the battery life of the entire operation.
Yeah.
It is the ability to persevere over time throughout the entire depth of an operational environment. It's about ensuring the force has the resilience to withstand shock, to preserve its combat power after taking heavy losses.
And just keep going.
To continue operations for as long as necessary to achieve the desired outcome, even if that means weeks or months. It's the long game.
And what about operational reach? How does that play into it?
So operational reach is the distance and the duration across which a force can successfully employ its military capabilities. And sustainment is the absolute limiting factor here. A division can be ordered to move 300 kilometers, but if its fuel or its repair capacity only allows it to operate effectively for, say, 150 kilometers before it needs a major resupply halt.
Then its reach is 150 kilometers, period.
Exactly. The operational reach is 150 kilometers, regardless of what the map says. Sustainment is the governor on aggressive maneuver. If you can endure, you cannot generate the combat power necessary to penetrate enemy defenses or, win that close fight.
And Field Manual 3.0 is very clear that the division's primary role during armed conflict involves defeating enemy forces, controlling land areas, and consolidating gains. And all of that is to enable the brigade combat teams to accomplish their missions in close combat.
Which requires a relentless, continuous application of combat power.
Which, in turn, demands a robust, resilient logistics tail. It's a chain.
It is absolutely a chain. And when we talk about large-scale combat operations, you have to remember, We aren't talking about small regional deployments. We are talking about the potential involvement of multiple corps and divisions operating simultaneously across hundreds of kilometers.
The scale is just immense.
The sheer scale alone dictates a sustainment capacity far exceeding anything we've really had to deal with recently. The sources, they reinforce that warfare is fundamentally chaotic and uncertain, and every leader must anticipate and manage that friction.
And that concept of friction, misunderstood orders, unexpected enemy actions, or the crucial point you mentioned about units consuming supplies at rates we didn't project, that imposes huge uncertainty.
Right.
And the commanders are the ones tasked with exercising operational art and assuming calculated risk within this chaos.
And that risk is exponentially magnified by the enemy's stated approach, which Field Manual 3DO characterizes as systems warfare.
Okay, this is where the old logistics models completely breaks down.
Completely. Systems warfare is not just about attrition, wearing the other guy down. It's about identifying and isolating or destroying critical components of an opponent's overall warfighting system. The enemy views our entire structure, our command centers, our long-range fires, and most importantly, our logistics network, as a set of interconnected subsystems they can surgically attack to induce systemic failure.
So the very idea of a logistics unit operating in a relative sanctuary it's just fundamentally obsolete. The rear area is now as much a part of the front line as the forward line of truce.
It is entirely gone. That sanctuary is a memory. Adversaries will use their integrated fires complexes, which include long-range rockets, missiles, and long-range surveillance capabilities, to attack critical components of our system.
Regardless of how far back they are.
Exactly. Regardless of whether they are 10 kilometers or 200 kilometers from the forward line of troops. The Doctrine gives some simple yet pretty frightening examples of this systems warfare in action.
Can you elaborate on some of those specific examples? I think that would really bring it home.
Sure. Consider electronic warfare. They use it to disable the links between our unmanned aircraft system controllers and the aircraft themselves, effectively blinding our intelligence and reconnaissance efforts.
Wow.
Or they deploy integrated air defense systems not just to protect their own forces, but explicitly to prevent our friendly air support from integrating with our ground operations. And when they target logistics, they are trying to prevent the flow of fuel, ammunition, and maintenance capacity, ensuring our forces culminate before achieving their objectives.
So if these logistics nodes, these command and control nodes, even staging areas which were historically considered safe, if they all become high-value targets, how does the Doctrine demand we react to preserve combat power?
The Doctrine demands proactive, aggressive, protective measures to prevent what's called defeat in detail, or premature culmination.
And premature culmination is what happens when a force just runs out of steam.
Exactly. It can no longer continue offensive operations because it has exhausted its combat power, either through personnel losses or, more often, through logistics failure. The response has to be maximum dispersion. We can no longer afford to mass large depots of supplies.
You can't put all your eggs in one basket anymore.
Not when that basket has a giant target painted on it. Commanders must integrate protection tasks, and that means actual security operations, air defense, and counter-surveillance throughout the entire depth of the operational environment, recognizing that the threat to the rear is continuous and it's lethal.
Okay, so to manage all this complexity, this vast and contested environment, the division uses the deep, close, and rear operational framework.
Right. And its effects have to project deep for attrition, isolation, and disruption of enemy reserves, and close for the immediate maneuver and destruction of enemy forces. But sustainment itself is predominantly conducted as a rear operation.
Let's focus on that rear area then, because that is the nerve center of logistics. Rear operations are defined as the activities necessary for sustainment, for support area security, for movement control, and for coordinated protection capabilities.
A lot is going on back there.
A ton. So when a commander looks at securing that area, why is it such a delicate balancing act, and what are the risks involved?
The Doctrine explicitly states that support area operations are often executed as an economy of force effort.
Yeah.
And this is honestly one of the toughest trade-offs a commander faces.
Economy of force, meaning you're using the minimum essential combat power for an area that's not the main effort.
Exactly. You're trying to save your strength for the decisive point. So commanders must carefully balance the combat power they dedicate to protecting rear operations and maintaining tempo against the demands of the main effort units committed to the close and deep operations.
So the commander is essentially deciding, do I send a battalion to guard the forward ammunition supply point, Or do I use that same battalion to reinforce the penetration in the close fight?
That's the decision, and it is operational life or death. You can't put all your maneuver assets on guarding a fuel depot, but if you leave the fuel depot unguarded and it's destroyed, the main effort's momentum collapses anyway.
Right.
The doctrine warns that accepting unnecessary risk in the rear, allowing an enemy penetration or the destruction of a key logistics node, can instantly break the operational momentum of the main effort. And it can effectively render a tactical victory impossible because of a strategic logistical failure.
The sources provide some very specific planning considerations for support area operations, emphasizing survivability and dispersion as direct countermeasures to that systems warfare you mentioned. What specifically must planners account for when they're building out that rear area?
Survivability is the watchword. It's everything. Planners have to conduct a detailed analysis of the desired tempo of the overall operation. Are we rapidly advancing? Are we holding a defensive line? This tempo dictates the logistics load.
And then they have to look at the enemy.
Then they must assess the specific capability of enemy maneuver and fires units that can actually affect the support area. This analysis determines the type and quantum of force required for protection, whether that means air defense, internal maneuver forces, or counter indirect fire capabilities.
And the command elements themselves need protection. They're sitting back there too.
Absolutely. They have to consider the location of the command and control nodes. The main command post, the tactical command post, the support area command post that will occupy the support area, and their specific protection needs from enemy indirect fire assets. Survivability here means effective dispersion, terrain management to maximize cover and concealment, and continuous movement.
They can't stay put.
You can't stay in one place for long because you have to assume the enemy is always watching.
And what about the flow of traffic? Movement control seems like it would be a complete nightmare in a highly dispersed, constantly moving rear area.
It's mission critical. It has to be managed. There must be detailed plans for movement control into, through, and out of the support area. This includes designating primary and alternate supply routes, coordinating military police assets, and establishing checkpoints.
Because if that flow stops,
If the flow of supplies is choked by congestion or disrupted by even a small enemy probing attack, the entire system slows down. Furthermore, plans for displacement, when and where logistics nodes will move, must be based upon the overall operation's advance or retreat, ensuring the rear area keeps pace with the close fight.
so what we're learning is that the rear area is not a passive holding area. It's not a safe zone. It is a dynamic, actively protected system that provides the necessary operational oxygen for the division.
That's a great way to put it.
It's the silent partner ensuring that the close operations, closing with and destroying enemy forces, and the deep operations, attriting, isolating, and disrupting attacking formations, can actually happen.
That synthesis is perfect. Rear operations are the mechanism that contributes directly and fundamentally to the entire formation's operational reach, tempo, freedom of action, and endurance. Without a secure, well-run rear area that can absorb shock and continue functioning under fire, the entire fight collapses within days.
Right.
So we've moved from the high-level doctrine of Field Manual 3 ago to the tangible science of operations, the hard planning factor.
The numbers.
The numbers. Sustainer planning is an exercise in data, and the supplemental reading gives us the specific quantitative tools essential for division staffs to turn these estimates into actionable logistics plans.
Okay, so let's start with the most serious and critical element, personnel. How do planners move from abstract fighting concepts to concrete numbers when estimating casualties in large-scale combat operations?
They rely on historical and projected data to create a baseline. The planning factors provide specific percentages for losses broken down by type: killed, wounded, and missing. For instance, in the brigade combat team or division area of operations, the planning factor assumes 18% are killed, 80% are wounded, and 2% are missing.
80% wounded.
80%. And this is compared against projected losses for the extended area of operations, which are slightly different: 16% killed and 84% wounded.
The implications of those percentages are just staggering. I mean, if a division takes 500 casualties, 400 of them are wounded and require evacuation and sophisticated medical treatment.
Absolutely. And here's a critical detail from the reading for resource allocation. The vast majority of these losses, 92.1%, are concentrated in combat arms. This detail is not trivial. It dictates how the Army Health System plan must be structured. It means that medical assets, especially Role 1, the battalion aid station, and Role 2, the brigade support medical company capabilities, must be positioned forward, close to the fighting forces, where the risk to those medical units themselves is highest.
But it's not just bullets and bombs. The sources highlight disease and non-battle injury DNBIs. And the rates vary significantly based on the operating location and intensity. I was shocked by this. The disease and non-battle injury rate in Iraq is more than triple the rate in the United States.
Yeah.
That single factor completely changes the entire medical logistics plan. Why is that specific planning factor so different?
It's the environment and the intensity of the operations. The disease and non-battle injury calculator chart demonstrates that the physical and psychological toll of high-intensity combat is immense. For example, the rate for combat forces in high-intensity operations in the division area in Iraq might be 2.01 per 1,000 personnel per day, whereas the rate for combat forces in the relative safety of the United States is only 0.65 per 1,000. This stark difference, more than a threefold increase, is due to fatigue, exposure, sanitation issues, stress, and the endemic diseases you might find in the operating area.
So a planner can't just plan for combat losses. They have to plan for preventive medicine, for sanitation, for managing non-battle-related exhaustion and injury at a much, much higher rate.
Precisely.
This means significant resource allocation just to keep people healthy enough to fight in the first place.
That environmental factor drives enormous variability in health service support requirements, and that includes preventive medicine teams, dental support, and even medical logistics for routine medications that you wouldn't think about in combat.
So given the potential for these high numbers of wounded in action, how does the division ensure casualty evacuation adheres to the policy standard of rapid transport, the golden hour?
It relies on a tightly integrated system that respects the time sensitivity of trauma. Department of Defense policy sets a very strict 60-minute standard for urgent and priority patient evacuation missions. That's the golden hour you mentioned. The Army primarily uses its rotary wing assets, like the HH-60Q helicopter and the larger CH-47 Chinook helicopter, for this purpose.
Can you break down the capacity difference there? Because that has to influence mission planning significantly.
Absolutely. The smaller HH-60Q, especially when it's equipped with a hoist for difficult terrain extraction, can typically carry 3 litter patients and 1 ambulatory patient.
Okay, so a small number, but very versatile.
Very. But the much larger CH-47 Chinook, which is often used for mass casualty situations or long-haul transport, can manage up to 24 litter patients or 31 ambulatory patients.
That's a huge difference.
It's a massive difference. So a mission planner has to assess the nature of the casualty collection point. Is it a slow trickle of severe injuries requiring fast transport? Or is it a mass casualty event requiring maximum lift capacity?
And it points to a layer of complexity that goes beyond just the helicopter itself. You mentioned authorizations earlier.
That's a critical point for command and control. Evacuation missions, especially those involving aeromedical assets, require 2 distinct authorizations before the aircraft even lifts off. First, a medical mission approval authority, which is granted by a medical authority who determines the patient's priority and the necessity of the mission.
And second.
And second, and equally important, is a launch authority, which must come from the aviation commander.
Why the dual authority? Why not just let the medics call for the bird?
Because the medical authority determines the urgency, but the aviation commander assesses the risk. The flight may be medically urgent, but if the threat, environment, weather, enemy air defense, or integrated fires is too high, the aviation commander has to weigh the risk to the crew and the aircraft against the need for that patient.
So the constant risk calculation.
Always. Without both of those authorities, the aircraft does not fly the mission.
And what about the physical supplies? Class 8 medical logistics. How are those consumption needs calculated at the theater and division level? We heard a number, 57 pounds.
Right. Class 8 requirements, which cover everything from bandages and plasma to specialized surgical kits for wounded in action and enemy prisoner of war casualties, are quantified by a formula. It's based on the number of Role 3, or advanced surgical care, admissions multiplied by 57 pounds per patient.
57 pounds.
That 57 pounds is a baseline planning factor for anticipating resource consumption at the theater level.
That sounds useful for long-term strategic calculation, but maybe less useful for tactical resupply in a fast-paced fight.
And that is precisely the challenge. While the 57 pounds per patient is used for high-level resource estimation, the planners are often advised that when estimating Class 8 requirements for combat operations at the division level and below, it is far more practical to plan on using pre-configured trauma medical resupply sets.
Like kits.
Exactly. These sets are standardized, easily loadable packages designed to support a certain number of casualties, making the resupply process faster and less dependent on precise individual calculations in a combat zone. It shifts the focus from weight to practicality and standardized kits.
Moving now to, let's call it traditional battlefield logistics, the elements that make metal move. Fuel, which is Class 3 bulk, and water, which is Class 1, are absolutely fundamental.
The basics.
The movement stops and life ceases without them. What specific guidance do the sources provide for calculating these essential resources?
For fuel, division planners cannot rely on back-of-the-envelope calculations. It's just too complex. They often rely on medium consumption rates derived from the quick logistics estimation tool data. These figures are the standard, conservative, baseline planning figures used during large-scale exercises, but they're really just a starting point.
So what makes the actual calculation so complex in a multi-domain fight?
To create an accurate projection for bulk fuel needs, planners must calculate consumption based on two distinct factors that have to be integrated into one projection. First, you have the vehicle consumption rates in gallons per hour, which account for movement and maneuver.
The tank's moving.
The tank's moving, the truck's moving. But second, you have the rates for stationary equipment, like the powerful generators needed for command and control nodes, communications relays, or water purification systems.
Things that consume fuel while sitting still.
Right. And in a highly dispersed operational environment where units are spread out and relying heavily on generators to stay connected and hidden, that stationary consumption can be immense and has to be factored in.
And water. It seems so basic, but I imagine the logistical implications of supplying water to tens of thousands of personnel are just enormous.
Water is existential, and its necessity extends far beyond simple drinking. It is critical for hygiene, for field feeding operations, and for vehicle maintenance, especially cooling systems.
I hadn't even thought of that.
And a crucial logistical and health factor is that all water used for consumption and heat injury treatment must be either potable or thoroughly disinfected. This immediately imposes a burden on the sustainment system to include water purification capabilities, not just distribution.
So what are the planning factors for that demand? How much are we talking about?
The planning factors list requirements in gallons per day per person. The critical baseline factor used in the sources is 6.7 gallons per person per day.
6.7 for one person.
For one person. So if you multiply that rate across a heavy division's strength of, say, 15,000 personnel, you quickly scale up to over 100,000 gallons required daily.
100,000 gallons.
A day.
A day. This requires immense transport and production capacity.
So, to meet that demand in a hostile dispenser environment, what kind of specialized support units are necessary for water management and purification? Specialized units, typically within the Quartermaster Corps, something like the Quartermaster Composite Supply Company, are key. They aren't just water haulers. They are responsible for providing water storage, distribution, and, most importantly, production capabilities through purification equipment right there in the theater.
They make the water.
They make it.
Yeah.
They have to ensure that the 6.7 gallons per person per day factor can actually be met consistently, even if the local water source is contaminated or unavailable.
Let's shift gears to equipment losses. We talked about personnel casualties, but maintaining fighting capability requires the repair and return of damaged equipment. So how is planning done for maintenance? And what optimistic or maybe risky assumptions are built into that repair process?
Maintenance planning relies on historical loss rates, again categorized by the type of operation. For example, during high-intensity attack or offensive operations, heavy forces are projected to have an 18% loss rate. However, this is where the planning factor makes a massive assumption about force protection and those uncontested rear areas we talked about. A crucial factor is that 80% of those losses are assumed to be repairable.
80% repairable. That is a huge assumption about the sustainability of the force. I mean, if the enemy successfully targets the sustainment maintenance facilities, that 80% becomes permanent loss.
And that cripples the division's endurance faster than anticipated.
Right.
That is the inherent tension. If you lose 100 tanks, the expectation is that 80 of them can be fixed and returned to the fight. But fixing them involves a complex two-level system. The maintenance system operates on two distinct echelons. Field maintenance, which is done by the brigade combat teams or forward support battalions.
Right up close to the fight.
And then sustainment maintenance, which is conducted further back in the support area by dedicated maintenance companies.
So how does the planner decide where a broken tank goes?
They have to estimate the distribution of repairables. For instance, planners calculate what percentage of those 80 repairable tanks are estimated to be fixed immediately on site or nearby by field maintenance assets.
And the rest?
And how many are deemed too complex or damaged, thus needing evacuation to the higher level sustainment maintenance facilities in the theoretically secure rear. This repair estimate is vital for tracking the unit's operational readiness rate day by day and predicting when that combat power will be available again. A robust sustainment operation ensures that repair curve remains steep.
So it's not just about getting supplies forward, it's about getting damaged goods back, fixing them, and pushing them forward again.
It's a continuous cycle.
Okay, so division sustainment requires incredibly complex, specialized organizational support, and much of this is often provided by theater-level assets that get attached down to the division or corps to integrate unique capabilities.
Yeah, these are units that handle functions far removed from simply hauling fuel. They deal with human capital, finance, and legal risk.
Starting with personnel support, let's talk about the Human Resources Company. Beyond basic administration, what are their critical, non-traditional sustainment tasks in a high-end fight?
Their tasks are absolutely foundational to command and control. The Human Resources Company is responsible for continuous personnel accountability, knowing who is where and what their status is. This includes providing accurate and timely casualty information and tracking for the commander's staffs.
Which has to be incredibly difficult in the chaos of combat.
It is, but that real-time casualty information is essential for command decision-making. A commander can't commit a battalion if they don't know its actual combat strength or if its casualties are still pending evacuation.
And what about the crucial issue of morale and quality of life?
They coordinate essential quality of life functions, most notably postal operations for the entire theater. This might sound minor, but the ability to receive mail from home is a huge factor in maintaining morale and endurance over long periods of deployment. The HR company is the operational link between the individual soldier and the overall personnel system.
The financial aspect is also crucial, particularly for stability operations, or when dealing with host nation partners, and, increasingly, supporting joint and multinational operations. What is the precise role of financial management units in this operational environment?
So the Financial Management Support Unit provides general financial management support on an area basis. This includes providing critical support to joint and multinational forces operating in the division's area. They advise commanders on how best to employ financial management forces.
But their most critical role is probably with contracting, right?
Yes. Most critically, they manage the legal and fiscal mechanisms necessary for contracted support-paying vendors, handling local purchases, and ensuring adherence to complex financial regulations during dynamic operations.
And this leads directly into operational contract support, which has become indispensable for expeditionary operations, where we rely on external support for everything from interpreters and logistical augmentation to infrastructure maintenance.
Absolutely vital.
So what is the required discipline process for securing that external support and making it legally binding?
Operational contract support is highly disciplined, and it relies strictly on adherence to the military decision-making process to prevent waste and, more importantly, illegal commitments. The first step is requirements determination, identifying exactly what mission support is eligible to be contracted versus what must be provided by organic military assets.
And once that requirement is identified, what specific documents must the staff develop to make it acquisition ready?
The staff has to develop an acquisition-ready requirements package, and this package is comprehensive and rigorous. It must include 3 mandatory documents.
Okay.
A detailed statement of work or performance work statement detailing exactly what the contractor must do. An independent government estimate to justify the cost and ensure fairness. And critically, a purchase request and commitment document formerly known as Department of the Army Form 3953, which is the funding commitment document.
So without that complete package,
Without that complete package, a contracting officer cannot legally award the contract.
that seems like an incredible administrative burden to manage in the chaos of combat, which probably explains why the doctrine highlights one major legal pitfall: the unauthorized commitment.
It is the great legal danger in the field, and it has severe consequences. An unauthorized commitment is defined as an agreement that is not legally binding solely because an official without procurement authority made it.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Imagine a junior officer urgently needing a contractor to repair a vital access road damaged by enemy fire. And he promises the contractor $50,000 immediately to get it done now. That officer lacks procurement authority.
So even though the road repair was critical, that agreement is legally invalid until it gets rectified.
Precisely. The commander must ensure all staff understand that only warranted contracting officers have the actual authority to legally obligate the government. If an unauthorized commitment occurs, ratification, which is the approval by an official with authority, is never automatic.
So you can't just fix it after the fact easily.
No, it requires a lengthy, often painful legal review process. This necessity emphasizes the critical importance of discipline and legal awareness within the division staff, even down to the lowest tactical leaders, because an unauthorized commitment can lead to personal financial liability or, worse, an investigation that diverts critical command attention from the fight.
Okay, finally, we have to circle back to the high-end fight because these sustainment challenges are magnified exponentially in unique operational environments. Specifically, those involving the threat of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons or vast maritime theaters.
They are absolute game changers for logistics.
Let's start with chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons. The threat is real. What does Field Manual 3.0 emphasize about operating in such a difficult, multidimensional environment, and what are the cascading logistical effects of an attack?
The doctrine requires that all planning account for the enemy's possible use of these weapons. Units have to be prepared to operate in, around, and through contaminated environments. This is foundational.
Because if the enemy thinks it will stop us, they're more likely to use it.
Exactly. Following an attack, the unit faces severe, cascading logistical and operational challenges.
And what are those specific challenges for sustainment?
They are systemic. You have high casualty rates, obviously, requiring massive medical support. But beyond that, they face drastically increased maintenance challenges on contaminated equipment, decreased communication efficiency due to necessary spectrum restrictions like emission control, and degraded mobility and intelligence operations because specialized equipment and sensors may be compromised.
And just the act of operating in that gear must be a logistical drain.
Oh, the logistical overhead of wearing protective gear alone reduces efficiency across the board and massively increases water consumption.
And what does this mean for the future viability of a unit after an attack? The sources talk about reconstitution.
Reconstitution, the process of restoring a unit to full combat power following a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear attack, presents even greater challenges than recovering from conventional losses. Large-scale decontamination is a massive, time-consuming undertaking that requires huge volumes of water and specialized chemicals.
And if you can't get it all clean.
If units cannot fully decontaminate mission-essential equipment, commanders must assess the severe risk to the mission and personnel in continuing operations with contaminated equipment. It's a grim risk assessment. Accept lower combat power due to non-availability of key equipment, or accept the health risk of using partially contaminated vehicles.
What about a maritime operational environment? Fighting across large island chains or vast stretches of water. This fundamentally changes the nature of sustainment.
It creates a logistical nightmare. This environment forces non-contiguous areas of operations. Units are separated by water, which drastically complicates mutual support, which relies on supporting range, and complicates sustainment, which relies on secure, continuous lines of communication.
The Army can't swim its tanks across the Pacific.
Exactly. Army forces are entirely dependent on joint air and maritime capabilities for movement between land masses and for ensuring supply lines are protected against sea and air threats.
That dependence requires detailed collaborative planning, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It requires a very high level of complex, integrated detail. The planning guidance demands coordination down to the hour for the movement and landing of troops, equipment, and supplies by both air and surface means. The success of Army operations on islands is uniquely dependent on integrated, collaborative planning with Navy and Marine Corps headquarters.
And this is where joint logistics over the shore, or JOLOTS, comes into play, a critical capability for force projection when deepwater ports are unavailable.
JLOTS is a technological marvel and a key enabler for combat operations in maritime environments. It allows heavy forces to be moved from ship to shore when established deepwater ports are unavailable or have been destroyed by the adversary.
And what does that system include?
The systems involved, like the offshore petroleum distribution system for fuel transfer and the elevated causeway systems for moving vehicles, provide vital strategic flexibility.
But the sources also sound a profound warning about joint logistics over the shore.
They do. The source explicitly warns that infrastructure is highly vulnerable, it is slow to build, it lacks inherent protection or early warning systems, and critically, it cannot displace quickly in the event of an enemy attack.
So it's a sitting duck.
This makes the entire setup, which is vital for sustaining a large force, a primary target for peer threats. Protection for these static sites is absolutely paramount and requires massive dedicated resources. The strategic flexibility it provides comes at the cost of presenting a massive static bullseye.
Finally, let's revisit protection for all sustainment forces, connecting back to our initial discussion on systems warfare. The ability of the enemy to observe friendly forces is a constant assumption now.
Yes, leaders must operate under the assumption they are always under observation due to the enemy's robust space and cyberspace intelligence gathering capabilities. They have synthetic aperture radar, advanced optics, and signals intelligence constantly monitoring the battlefield.
So every logistical movement, every communication signal, and every massing of equipment is visible.
Correct. Consequently, sustainment formations must pursue operation security, survivability, and active protection with the same level of commitment as combat units. We've seen historical examples like in the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, where Azerbaijan achieved air superiority and placed Armenian forces under continuous surveillance with unmanned aircraft systems.
And the results were devastating.
The Armenian forces' inability to remain hidden meant Azerbaijan could destroy their tanks, artillery, and vehicles at a devastating rate.
So what are the practical requirements for our sustainment formations today to counter that kind of threat?
For our forces, this translates directly to a constant, disciplined battle drill, continuously maintaining maximum dispersion, maximizing camouflage and concealment, and practicing rigorous electromagnetic emission control.
Radio silence.
Radio silence, limiting satellite uplinks, avoiding high-power radar, anything to hide from enemy long-range fires and surveillance systems. They have to be logistically resilient and invisible.
So this deep dive reveals that sustaining division operations is fundamentally a multi-domain joint effort, where the quantitative science of logistics, from calculating fuel needs based on gallons per hour to estimating casualty rates using specific percentages, must meet the qualitative art of leadership in managing risk and complexity across a highly contested battlefield.
Indeed. The division commander's success hinges entirely on staff competency in projecting logistics requirements accurately and protecting those assets with the same intensity applied to the front line.
From the smallest detail to the biggest.
From calculating the required capacity of an HH-60Q helicopter for patient evacuation, to managing the legal constraints of contracted support using the proper Department of the Army Form 3953, it's a battle of numbers and discipline.
So what does this all mean for the operational leader tasked with leading a division into the next major conflict? What's the central mandate here?
The key takeaway is the absolute necessity of continuous anticipatory planning and integration. Sustainment cannot be an afterthought. It has to drive the operational scheme of maneuver. The doctrine demands continuous integration, especially between protection and sustainment, down to the lowest tactical echelons, specifically to defeat enemy anti-access and area denial approaches that seek to starve the force of the supplies it needs to fight and endure.
That raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider as you wrap up this deep dive. Given the extreme vulnerability of vital sustainment infrastructure, like the joint logistics over the shore systems, and the enemy's constant focus on systems warfare targeting, how might a division commander successfully disguise and continuously displace their most critical logistical nodes, such as their primary fuel and ammunition reserves, to maintain operational endurance against a peer threat, while simultaneously meeting the demands of high consumption rates in the close fight? The ability to answer that question is the future of maneuver warfare.